This is a wonderful question where 1,000 flowers bloom. Forgiveness is a human response that, for me, implies our participation with God in the ministry of reconciliation delegated to us, ambassadors of Christ. And then the question, can you talk a bit more about our participation with God in loving others? Well, I think for me, any question that begins, can you talk a bit more about? Yes, the short answer is yes. Usually I can talk a lot more about it. I'll try to make it brief here. But this is a wonderful way of looking at forgiveness, it seems to me. And I can think of three things I'd like to say in response to talk just a bit more about it. One is to quote, I think it's the author Joan Chittister, who says, since forgiveness is so important to God that we are never closer to God than when we forgive. And when we look at the biblical portrait of God, his eagerness, his willingness to forgive, that when we forgive, we are closer to God than at any other time. I think there's another way in which we participate in God's forgiveness, and that is if we think of ourselves offering someone forgiveness, not so much as trying to find within ourselves a well of grace and generosity and forbearance, but rather, instead of saying, I forgive you, to say essentially, I offer you God's forgiveness. I'm not putting myself in the place of having all that I need to be a forgiving person, but rather perhaps I can represent by what I say and do the sort of forgiveness that God offers you. I think that removes from us the burden that a lot of people feel when they hear about the commands to be forgiving, that somehow, unless and until I'm the kind of person who's got everything you need to be forgiving, well then I really am insincere when I forgive. No. I think the thing to do is to say, I can represent and offer God's forgiveness. Third and finally, I think one of the real values of open theism is the fact that it so emphasizes God's forgiveness, his willingness to interact with us, to be forbearing, to move on from where we are in directions that we could not ourselves foresee. So God is capable of surprising us. We sometimes think of divine transcendence primarily in terms of God's surpassing the highest reaches of human thought, particularly in his metaphysical attributes. But it's interesting to think that it's in his personal attributes that God may be most surprising of all. Let me quote a couple of texts here from the passage. I'd like to quote them out of order, actually. They're from Isaiah 55. Starting with verses 8 and 9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Now, we often apply those texts to qualities about God that we can't possibly understand, eternity, omniscience, and so forth. But it's interesting what precedes those verses, and this is what we find. Verses 6 and 7, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their way, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them return to the Lord, that he may have mercy upon them, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. God's transcendence is linked directly to his capacity to forgive, which surpasses anything that we can imagine. So, I guess if I draw a homiletical conclusion, it would be, let us strive to be as surprising in our relations to other people as God is in his relations to us, and participate to the fullest extent we can in achieving and promoting reconciliation, not just in our own lives, but in the world in which we live.
Amen. Amen. Yes.